Okay, so today we're going to do Unit 2, Day 7 notes, which is basically understanding the y-intercept. Now, you already know that the slope-intercept form of a linear function is y equals mx plus b. Now, obviously you have no idea what each letter stands for, but today we're going to learn about the y-intercept, which basically is the letter b. Letter b stands for the y-intercept of your linear function. Now, what does the y-intercept mean? If you read it backwards, intercept y. So in other words, it's where your graph crosses the y-axis. So basically where the graph intercepts the y-axis, okay? Now, you can find the y-intercept from a graph, an equation, or a table. From a graph, you can locate it where the line crosses the y-axis, and the reason I say a line is because we're studying linear functions. So all of our graphs should be a straight line. So basically, if we're looking at a graph, it's where the line crosses the y-axis. Now, if you're looking at an equation, it's where the constant, also known as the letter b, is, and that will be your y-intercept. And if you're looking at a table, it's basically where the x equals 0. That will be your y-intercept, okay? Now let's go ahead and start. Now number 1 and 1.2, I am not going to go over the graphs, the graphing part, because I'm under the impression that you already know how to graph by hand. So what I'm going to do with those equations is just quickly identify the y-intercept. Now anytime you have an equation and they're asking you for the y-intercept, just go ahead and write your standard, your slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. Now if you follow, y equals number x, and then what's at the end, the constant, the number that does not have the letter or the variable, is your letter b. And remember, if there's a sign in front of the number, it belongs to it, and there is. There's a -5, so that belongs to the 5. So my letter b is -5. So the y-intercept is -5. Now, there's two ways that I can write the y-intercept. I can write it as y equals -5, or I can write it as an order pair, 0, -5. Now, you might think, well, why 0, -5? Well, if you were to graph 0, -5, okay, it will be somewhere around here. Now, if I were to graph this line, I'm saying that this line is going to cross right there and -5 on the y-axis. Now the reason why we write as an order pair is because what is the x value? 0. Okay, and the reason we do y equals -5 is because it's on -5 on the y-axis. So there's two ways of writing this, but just know that when we write the order pair for a y-intercept, the x value is always 0. That is a fact that never changes, because if the line's touching somewhere on the y-axis, then that means that the x value has to be 0. So that's why we can write as an order pair, 0, -5. So we're always going to know that the order pair, when we're looking at it, it's always going to be 0, b, whatever the letter b is, 0, b. So you can write it out like that, or you can say y equals the letter b, whatever your y-intercept is. Okay? Now moving on to 1.2. Same idea, put your y equals mx plus b. And if you look at this, you notice that the constant of the equation is the 7. So that means your y-intercept could be y equals 7, or you can say 0, 7 as an order pair. But just know that on the EOG, you could be given any of these two, so you just need to be able to recognize both. Now, number 2, you take a moment to find the y-intercept of each equation and pause the video. Okay, so now I'm going to work these problems out. So the first one, remember y equals mx plus b. There's no b. There's no number behind the x. There's no constant. So what kind of number would it be for nothing? If there's nothing there. And it will be 0. Okay? So it should have been y equals 0, or you could just do 0, 0. Okay. Number 2.2. Y equals mx plus b. Your b is at plus 8. So that means your y-intercept is on the y-axis at 8. So y equals 8. Or at the order pair 0, 8, which is the same location. Okay. Now, for number 3 and number 3.2, basically when you're looking at a graph, just look at where your graph or your line touches the y-axis. Well, the y-axis is the one that goes up and down. So where does this graph, this diagonal line, touch my y-axis? Well, as you can tell, right here. Okay? So your y-intercept is going to be y equals 5, or you can say 0, 5. Okay, you see, that's where it intersects with the y-axis. Now, 3.2, as you can clearly see, it touches the y-axis at -1. So your y-intercept could be y equals -1, or you can say 0, -1. Both of these are valid answers. Okay, go ahead and flip to the next side of the notes. Now, what about a table? Well, if you're looking at a table, we already know that the x value has to be 0. It's always 0 when we're looking at the y-intercept. So that means when we look at a table, we're looking at where the x value is 0. So it's 0 there. So the y value will be your y-intercept. So my y-intercept is 8. So y equals 8. Or you can just do the order pair, 0, 8. Now 4.2. Same idea, locate where the x is 0, right here. Therefore, your y-intercept is 4. So y equals 4, or you can say 0, 4. Now, you take a moment to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And yes, 5 is a little bit tricky, but see if you can do that problem. And go ahead and pause the video so you can have some time to work them out. Okay. So now, number 1, obviously your y-intercept will be where it touches the y-axis, and it's right there at +3. 1, 2, 3, right there. So your y-intercept for the graph is y equals 3, or you can say 0, 3. For the table, all you have to do is look at where the x equals 0, which is right there. So your y-intercept is y equals 0, or you can say 0, 0. Number 3, write down your slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. Obviously, your letter b for this one is the constant, which is -8. So your y-intercept will be y equals -8, or you can say 0, -8. Now for the next one, as you notice, they wrote it in a different form, in a different way. They put the x at the end. So I would just rewrite this where the x is at the front. And now this is a -7x. So -7x, and then this 4 is a +4, so I'm going to write it at the end. Now it looks like every other equation that I've seen. So y equals mx plus b. And of course your y-intercept is plus b, which is the +4 in the equation. So your y-intercept is y equals 4, or you can say 0, 4. And last but not least, number 5. Where does this graph cross the y-axis? Nowhere. It's never going to cross. So in this situation, your y-intercept will be undefined. Okay? And it makes sense, really, if you think about it, because we already know that this line is not a function. So it will only make sense that because it's not a function, it wouldn't have a y-intercept. It wouldn't have the same characteristics as a diagonal line, okay, that is a function. So, of course, if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to ask me the next day in class.